Welcome and thank you for being with us today. I'm Amjad Ahmed, Director and Senior Fellow of the Atlantic Council's Empower ME initiative. At Empower ME, we are working to shape solutions to empower entrepreneurs, women, the private sector to drive economic growth and prosperity in the Middle East. Since our launch, we have brought a fresh perspective to the discussion, often dominated by politics and security, to focus on areas that can build human and economic development, which are essential to the future stability of the region. I'm proud to announce that we have partnered with Imagine Labs, a leading communications and technology agency, to build the Middle East Entrepreneurship Program Tracker. This is a new interactive tool that maps out the organizations that the governments of Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates have founded, funded, or partnered with to support entrepreneurs, startups, and small and medium-sized enterprises. It features 312 programs and initiatives offered by 122 organizations across 6 ecosystems. The tracker is geared towards startups and SMEs in need of targeted government services, policymakers aiming to spur innovation and collaboration, and investors seeking a deeper understanding of these ecosystems. As of this morning, the tracker is now live. Please explore it using the link in the chat. We're honored today to host distinguished panelists featuring 4 ministers who will shed light on how their governments are nurturing innovation. I am joined today by United Arab Emirates Minister of State for Entrepreneurship and SMEs, His Excellency Ahmed Balhoul Al-Falasi, Jordan Minister of Digital Economy and Entrepreneurship, His Excellency Ahmed Al-Hananda, Egypt Minister of International Cooperation, Her Excellency Rania Al-Mashat, and Bahrain Minister of Industry, Commerce, and Tourism, His Excellency Zayed Al-Zayani. Welcome, Your Excellencies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As you know, pleasure. As you know, despite the pandemic, the region's entrepreneurship ecosystem is on a positive overall trajectory. In 2021, VC funding reached $2.6 billion, I should say, 138% more than in 2020. An all-time high of 590 deals occurred, including a record-breaking 35 exits announced and the highest number of investors financing venture in MENA's history. Still, there remain challenges such as the need for economic diversification, regional integration, education and training, legal and regulatory reform, and increasing opportunities for women. I will now invite each of you to give few opening remarks in response to the following question. Why is supporting entrepreneurship important to your economy? And what have you done so far to develop your country's entrepreneurship ecosystem? But first, allow me to introduce our first speaker, Her Excellency Rania Al-Mashat. Her Excellency has been Egypt's Minister of International Cooperation since 2019 and previously served as the country's first female Minister of Tourism. Before that, she was advisor to the Chief Economist of the International Monetary Fund and also served as Sub-Governor for Monetary Policy and at the Central Bank of Egypt. The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Amjad, and very happy to be with all distinguished ministers from the region. The topic we're discussing today is a very important, if I can say, core for all countries, not just in the region, but globally. And if we are looking at one of the silver linings from the pandemic, as you pointed out, was the importance of the use of technology and how there has been a more accustomed to technological solutions. When you say why should countries focus on entrepreneurship, just by the demographics of our region, and we take the case of Egypt, we have more than 60% of our population below the age of 35. Therefore, for jobs to be created, private sector engagement is very, very important. And therefore, the types of jobs that need to be produced as well are not the traditional jobs that you see in the public sector or even regular private sector jobs, The match that we need to push for is one which is digitally savvy, one where risk is being more nurtured. This is really the language of modern economies. So when we say economies need to be inclusive, need to be digital, and need to be green, these are three important words. And part of the digital economy is really the ecosystem, which is related to entrepreneurship. Also, when we say green, today the focus on green solutions and technology related to the environment also bring to the forefront the importance of investing in entrepreneurship, making the life of entrepreneurs easy when it comes to access to finance, when it comes to financial literacy, when it comes to some of the regulations that sometimes impede the growth of small companies. So there is a conviction from the government of Egypt, the importance of entrepreneurship. And we are also embarked on a structural reform program with one of the pillars related to the ICT sector. And the ICT sector is important when we're talking about the infrastructure related to connectivity, also related to pushing incubators, having them in schools and universities, trying to create a culture where risk-taking is not frowned upon, but actually pushed and supported. Egypt was one of the very few countries in the region that has put public money in a company that pushes entrepreneurship and startups, and really the growth rate that we've seen over the past few years is one which is quite impressive and has also been quoted in several international reports. I will stop here and look forward to the discussion with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'll now turn to His Excellency, Dr. Ahmed Balhoul Al-Falasi. His Excellency was named the Minister of State for Entrepreneurship and SMEs under the new UAE government structure approved in July 2020, just in time for this event. So it's a perfect title. He was previously the Minister of State for Higher Education, the Chairman of the Federal Authority for Human Resources, the Chairman of the Board of Directors of the UAE Space Agency, and the CEO of Masdar Company. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Jeff, for hosting me. I think, look, Her Excellency, Dr. Rania mentioned all the valid points, but if I were to refer to the UAE specifically, the UAE has long been a trade hub and a financial hub. What we're trying to do right now is to make it an entrepreneurial hub as well. I think one of the strengths of the UAE specifically is the demographics and the access to talent around the region. And as you know, most entrepreneurial hubs succeed based on the quality of talent coming into it. And today, we have access to young, excited youth from the region. I keep saying we are the ABCDs, Amman, Beirut, Cairo, and Dubai. People come to the UAE often. And one of the things that we have changed in order for us to accommodate and to attract more talent is that we've launched the entrepreneurial residency visa as well, where you could come in as an entrepreneur and not have to be linked to a work visa. Traditionally in the Gulf, if you were to come in, you would have to be sponsored with a work visa, but that has changed because now we're moving on from being the traditional relationship between employer and employee to a much more flexible, fluid pool of talent, because that is at the end of it, the engine of growth for entrepreneurship. We have been lucky to be for the 12th consecutive year, being ranked as the #1 country for youth in the region to work at. So that's something to our advantage. And as well, the UAE has always been an access to the wider region. So the UAE market may not be as large as other countries, but again, it's a solid platform with the right regulation in place, right infrastructure, where entrepreneurs incubate themselves in the UAE and then are able to experience high trajectory growth in neighboring markets. The biggest unicorns in the region came from the UAE. However, they expanded into countries like Egypt, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. So that has been one of the strengths that we have had. One of the challenges I've seen personally is that we, as Dr. Rania has mentioned, the culture is not there. The wealth of hydrocarbons has been a blessing, but at the same time, it created a preconceived notion that the go-to job is a government job, whereas we know from what we've seen, the numbers that we have seen, that there's a much better opportunity when you create your own company. So similar to Egypt, we've launched programs in schools and universities where we encourage students to think not of what job would I take when I grow up, but what kind of company would I set up? What kind of solution would I like to take? Because we really want them to be part of this whole movement. And finally, when it comes to the ecosystem itself, and Amjad, you've been part of this ecosystem, you would know this. The VC ecosystem has transformed in a big way in the UAE. Over the past 4 years, the average inflow of VC funding was about $500 million. This year, we had a record-breaking $1.2 billion. And also the average deal size across all stages from early stage to Series A to Series B has tripled across each round, which also is another sign of maturity. So we think that we're in a very good place. We do have a strategy to graduate, quote unquote, 20 unicorns by 2030. But we really want as well the local population to be part of that movement. And this is why we created a brand called the Entrepreneurial Nation, which has a big element on culture to educate Emiratis to look at entrepreneurship as their number one choice. I'll leave it there. There's much to be discussed, but I'll leave up the room for my fellow ministers to chip in. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I'll now introduce His Excellency Ahmed Al-Halanda. His Excellency is Jordan's Minister of Digital Economy and Entrepreneurship. Before this position, he served as Chief Financial Officer and later Chief Executive Officer of Zain Jordan. Earlier in his career, he was also Country Manager for Aramex Group. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. I'm happy, pleased, and delighted to participate in this discussion among such a great group of people. Very inspiring talk from Egypt and the UAE. To be honest, I'll try not to repeat what is said, but the entrepreneurial ecosystems are the fastest growing in the Middle East region. They're attracting the attention of everybody, the attention of investors, the attention of the government. They're contributing nicely to the jobs creation. They are contributing nicely to the transformation, the overall transformation and the digital transformation in specific. We all know that the world is transforming, economy is transforming, lifestyle is transforming, education is transforming, transportation is transforming, health is transforming. With the new technologies and revolution of technologies and the increasing dependency on the internet and the virtual world that is maturing to compete with real life and real world. Big and huge organizations, they're not agile enough to respond to the fast changes. And they left a big space of opportunities for entrepreneurs, startups, and SMEs to actually capture these opportunities and operate within this new economy. We continuously hear new terminologies, new concepts, and new models. And let's take, for example, the peer-to-peer economy. The peer-to-peer economy has opened the door for a mega number of entrepreneurs operating within what we know as a peer-to-peer economy. And this is not a new concept. This has been there in the small communities, but due to the internet and the world of the online world, they managed to actually increase the reach to the whole community instead of the neighborhood. So the peer-to-peer economy is a concept that people are used to. It's like the transportation applications are actually carpooling or ride sharing. So we all know it historically, what does it mean? But because of the technology, the entrepreneurs managed to make it a national and regional and global solution. In Jordan, our story with the entrepreneurial ecosystem is not actually new. Jordan started back in 1988 with a $2 million fund. And the companies created with this $2 million fund back in 1988 are today considered regional companies, and they're still leading the ICT sector and the superstars of the ICT sectors in Jordan. Then back in 2000, His Majesty saw the potential in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and encouraged the youth and the private sector to get into supporting this ecosystem. And with his support and the efforts of the Jordanian entrepreneurs, they managed to organically grow this ecosystem to be one of the most promising and fastest growing ecosystems in the region, contributing with a big number of new companies coming into this ecosystem on annual basis. Hundreds of companies, thousands of employees. And then in 2011, another cornerstone was put into the ecosystem by establishing one of the first incubators in the region that made a big difference after the establishment of this incubator. Today we operate more than 35 incubators in Jordan. We have 11 VCs operating in Jordan. And again, hundreds of entrepreneurs are created on an annual basis. Some of them move into the SME stage, some of them stay in the entrepreneurial stages of every stage, Series A and Series B. The government recently launched its first national entrepreneurial policy and established this National Entrepreneurship Council with a strategy and an implementation plan for the coming period, where the government is going to take its enabling role. We're not going to go and disturb their success story and their growth. What we'll do is we're going to enable this ecosystem to grow further, and we'll focus on the pillars that we need to focus at, and that's the access to finance, access to markets, the regulatory environment where they have some challenges and they need some changes in the regulatory environment, as well as the continuous supply of talents to the ecosystem. The demand on upskilled talents, bridging the gap between the education and the requirements of this ecosystem, needs someone to come in and fill in this gap. We're trying to fill in the gap between demand and supply through different programs and partnerships with multiple entities to have a continuous supply of talents. On the other side, I would second what Mr. Al-Falasi said, ABCD, EFG, HY, whatever. I mean, we have to think as a region. In isolation, we'll always be handicapped. As a region, we're stronger. We're in a region that complements each other, by the way. I have never seen this region, individual countries competing with each other. On the contrary, each country has something that the other country needs. Each country has something that the other country wants. So at the end of the day, we'll have to, in the Middle East, and if we want to have our ecosystem, the regional ecosystem, the Arab ecosystem, the Arab entrepreneurial ecosystem to shine further in the coming years, I believe we need to think as a region. We'll have to think as a region. We need to open up for our entrepreneurs the borders and the markets and the support networks so they can actually interact, engage with each other, and they can build something that can. Today we have wasted efforts because of similar ideas coming up in each and every country. But imagine, if this idea comes up as a single idea in one region, it's going to be stronger, it's scale up faster, it will have the ability to attract investments, the appetite to investment more. So, in my opinion, I have been, while I was in the private sector, today I'm in the public sector. I'm a strong believer, the Middle East as a region can do miracles for the entrepreneurial ecosystem, for our entrepreneurs and for our small and medium-sized companies. Thank you very much.
Well said. Thank you, Your Excellency. And last but not least, let me introduce Her Excellency Zayed Al-Zayani. His Excellency was appointed as Bahrain's Minister of Industry, Commerce, and Tourism in December 2014. Before his appointment, His Excellency spent 25 years with his family business and served as chairman of Al-Zayani Investments Group, Euro Motors, Zayani Motors, Zayani Leasing, Zayani Properties, Zayani Industries, and Orient Motors. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Amjad. Delighted to be with you and to be given this opportunity to share my views with the esteemed panel. I think I'm disadvantaged having to speak after such well-versed colleagues. I think they touched on many of the points I had wanted to suggest, and that only reinforces what His Excellency Ahmed Al-Hanad suggested, that this region really complements one another, because we all face, in essence, the same challenges, whether it is in any of the countries represented here today or beyond. We have a growing population, we have a young population, we have traditionally been trading countries and countries that believed in open commerce, free flows of goods and services. And I think more peculiar to the Gulf, the fortunes that came with the discovery of oil in abundance have kind of created a generation that is more dependent on the state than dependent on its own initiatives and itself. The classic case I always use with when I have sessions here with startups or entrepreneurs in Bahrain is not what we can offer you today, is what your grandparents and grandparents did 100, 150 years ago, when there was not even a formal government or a state in place, yet they ventured and they went as far as India and Africa and Levant and some even to Europe, whether to study or to trade, and in very basic means, using dhows, using very primitive banking systems back then, and they managed to succeed and they managed to lay a footprint. I think the biggest challenge we have to shy away from here is two things, in my opinion, and this is what we've been striving for in Bahrain for a few years now. One is to convert the mindset. That's, I think, is our biggest challenge. The mindset should be converted, and we even launched a slogan for it here in Bahrain to embed it at a very early stage, is that you should be a job creator rather than a job seeker. Traditionally here, because of the growth of the state and the relatively good jobs and stable jobs the public sector offers, a lot of the youth just tend to have the ambition to join government and progress through the ranks of government, whether it is in civil service or military service. We would like to change that, to give them more of a challenge to go out and take a risk in the market and look for something more risky. So that has been really something that we have been pushing for. And we've been using it as an example to say, instead of being one Bahraini looking for a job, think that you can be a Bahraini employing 5 others, and therefore you'd make a career for yourself, create a business, and support other families who are not as fortunate or as blessed as being in your position. So I think that is something we are driving forward with. It will take time. It's a generational thing. It won't change overnight. We have to be realistic about it, but we see very positive signs coming out. A lot of new entrepreneurs popping up. And entrepreneurship really doesn't have an age. We shouldn't just talk about the young population. Yes, it's true that the majority of our population is young and we have to create jobs and opportunities for them. But an entrepreneur could be as old as somebody who's just retired after many years of service, because basically entrepreneurship is an idea. It's something new or something, a challenge that has not been taken up or not taken up as well as someone is doing it today. So we're open to that. What we've done in Bahrain is we found that a lot of the problems were occurring not because of the traditional things we talk about, like access to finance or markets. Yes, those are very important, but a lot of it had to do with mentorship and leadership. The problem usually is compounded at the very early stages of starting a business, converting it from an idea or a thought to a structure, to a physical operation. And a lot of that is really mental. It's the fear of the unknown, it's the fear of failure, the peer pressure, and we have it quite in abundance in our Arabic culture, that, you know, fear of how would I face my parents or my siblings or my friend. I'll be framed as a failure, something that does not resonate or exist in the American culture. You know, I've had a lot of cases in America, and I've studied in American friends who say, well, I'm proud that I failed 2 or 3 times, because each time I fail, I learn a lesson. You'll hardly find that in the Arab world. You know, people would tend to shy away from admitting their unsuccessful attempts and try to brag about the one success and forget about all the lessons learned from the unsuccessful attempts. So we've put up a structure for it here. His Highness, the Crown Prince, the Prime Minister, formally put up a board. We called it the SME Development Board back in 2018, and we launched a national strategy for that board. We had KPIs, and we had 22 initiatives to achieve these KPIs. It was a 5-year strategy. We just launched version 2.0 actually on the 31st of January, because the 5 years has elapsed, and it's a continuation of where we started back in 2018. I think we shouldn't rush this. It's a journey, it's not a trip. It will take generational changes to get the full effect of it. But there are certainly success stories we can enjoy on the way. There's a lot to be done, whether it is in legislative or supportive or community work, mentorship. Finance, of course, is very important. Access to markets, and especially in a country as small as Bahrain. I mean, we are totally the opposite of Egypt. We have a population of 1.5 million and very small geography, whereas, you know, in Egypt, if you succeed, you can do it very well with 100+ million population. You don't need to even think about countries next to you. But unfortunately in Bahrain, if we want to talk about global success and unicorns, we have to push entrepreneurs to start to think global from day one and have that down the line. I think I'll stop here because I don't want to take more of everyone else's time, but this is a very precious topic to me personally. I'm honored that His Highness has asked me to chair the SDB board, which involves 5 government agencies plus the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Bahrain. So we have involvement of the private sector in it as well. And we're very happy to see that the initiatives are yielding results and that the SME culture is changing in Bahrain, and entrepreneurship is becoming something that we have in our DNA, but it's been, I wouldn't say suppressed, but it's been diluted over the last 3-4 generations, and it's time for it to come back.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You bring up a lot of great points that we'll be definitely delving into. Unfortunately, we're losing Her Excellency Al-Mash'ad a bit early, so I'd like to fit in a question if that's okay. You know, Egypt, frankly, has had such a stellar couple of years in terms of entrepreneurship. And I think a lot of people are wondering what sparked that awakening, in your opinion, on the ground. What happened exactly that we saw this sort of great momentum? And I think more importantly is, what do you think it's going to take to continue that momentum, in your opinion?
You know, I think there's supply and there's demand. With the youth pool of this size, there's a momentum that is self-generated. With the connectivity that we see today, youth being able to access information from other countries, from other regions, being able to exchange ideas and so forth. So there has been, internally, a move towards taking more risk, doing something innovative. The dividends that have come out of success have been very clear to many. And then on the supply side, the government understanding that this is the future, trying as much as possible to keep out of the way, and trying as much as possible to dismantle many of the regulatory, historic, if you will, overhaul that we have. So those are two very important components. And the other is also the leadership. So we were just at the World Youth Forum in Sharm el-Sheikh in January, and the president, devotes a whole part of the Youth Forum on entrepreneurship, and at the closing, giving very clear vision that we want to nourish that more and push it forward and create exchange for entrepreneurs, not just Egyptian to Egyptian, but Egyptians to the world, to the region, and so forth. So endorsement, an understanding that this is the future, wanting to not lag behind, but actually push forward. And as all my colleagues mentioned, in their opening remarks, showing successful cases is extremely important. Today, we are seeing that Ghani is now on NASDAQ. So this is a Middle East startup, which is now, has made it big. And so the exchanges that can happen between our youth is one which we should push together as policymakers, as those who really believe in the future. Egypt continues to believe that we can be a hub for this ecosystem. We're trying as much as possible to support incubators, to support VCs that want to come and invest, and the growth rate has just been phenomenal over the past few years. And we want to see that continue. Fear of failure will always be there, but showcasing in the limelight what successes would be. Also, government showing the problems that need solution is something else. Like we have started, we're going to be hosting COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh next November. And when we're talking about green, where also technology comes in and features in very much, given the size of the population, given the diversity of the economy, you need green solutions in different places. And we will shed light on the entrepreneurs that have been able to use biofuels, to recycle oil, etc. So there's so much going on dynamically in the world today where there is a space for good idea, and we want to promote that even further.
How, just to pull on the string of talent for 1 second, I know obviously you have a very big population, so creating jobs and opportunities for Egyptians is very important. But how do you feel about the overall flexibility of the labor market to allow for regional people to come in and out? Is that something that you think is warranted going forward to keep that talent pool sort of very vibrant and regional and dynamic and diverse?
So, compared to, and I'm being very frank, compared to other countries, part of the reasons why sometimes our startups can't grow as much as they do elsewhere is because of the ability to have this, to allow this labor mobility. But this is something that we are now very mindful of, because we have these discussions with the startups who have made it, who have not made it, to basically see what we can do as a government to try and solve some of these existing impediments. But there is that realization now, and we want to stay competitive. And in a world where there's so much, I know there's complementarity, but at the same time, there is also competition. And that's why we need to think a little bit on some of the legislative items. But that aside, this idea of labor coming in and out, training programs are extremely important. We didn't get a chance to talk about women particularly, but because Empower Me also has the elements of gender, women in science, women in engineering, reskilling after COVID, all of these are very important pointers that have been integrated into policy. And these are investing in human capital is an investment for the future. It takes time, but you know that there will be a dividend later on. But the world is changing so fast, Amjad. What used to be mainstream just last month is obsolete already. So that's why the openness of the youth to what's happening around them in the world is so important, because it helps inform us as policymakers on what needs to be done going forward. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being involved and staying with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. Thank you. I have to exit. Bye-bye.
I want to be fair to His Excellency Az-Zayani, because he went last time. So I want to give him this question now. I think we heard from several of you regarding this risk appetite and changing that culture. And you talked about being job creators rather than job seekers. How do you see that change, and what would allow sort of youth today to take that risk, in your opinion? What is that thing that you're sort of trying to ignite to say, give this a try, and if you fail, it's fine? How do you sort of create that sort of backstop, let's say, or that security that if they fail, that there are other things that they can sort of lean on?
There isn't one magical solution. I think it's a combination of many factors. One of the things we could address easily in Bahrain and straight away was the change of our bankruptcy law. In the past, our previous bankruptcy laws did not allow the facility for restructuring, or what you term as Chapter 11 in the US. And that was a true deterrent, because people thought, if I fall short, then I'm done. It was a matter of life or death. There was no ICU in between. So we amended our bankruptcy laws by including a restructuring and protection chapter similar to Chapter 11. We worked with the CLDP on developing that, and that has given sort of a safety net for companies. A lot of companies fail, but they don't fail drastically. They just fail, but they fail enough not to bounce back. So with that in mind, it gave them like a trampoline effect. They can bounce back again and move. Not necessarily for startups, even for some existing companies who may face some cash flow issues in the interim. The biggest challenge still remains is the social acceptance of failure. And this is something, like I said, is a generational change. It has to be embedded from schooling, not by the time they get into entrepreneurship. And the biggest inspiration, really, and the biggest game changer in that is highlighting success stories. Once you have a few poster boys or girls and saying, this is somebody who had no business 3, 4, 5 years ago, and today they converted the business, or they sold the business, or they grew the business, and it's now worth X. And it's something, a product or a service that we as consumers use in everyday life routine. That gives aspiration to the newcomers, that they think that I could be the next person, the same way that this person has succeeded. That to me is the biggest thing. And we are looking more and more for such people in Bahrain. And when I say Bahrain, we don't mean Bahrainis necessarily. We were trying to push Bahrain and position Bahrain to be a global player in this field. And people can come from all over the world and use the ecosystem that we have created in Bahrain, whether this the sandbox we have created for the fintech industry, and we see a lot of successes there and a lot of graduates coming out of it with brilliant ideas. And use Bahrain as a platform, regardless of where they came from or what country they are citizens of. So the biggest change, in my opinion, will remain for a while is the culture change. The rest is all doable in terms of finance. If you have a great idea, you'll find the funding. If you can't find it in the region, you'll find it from venture capitalists or angel investors around the world. Packaging the idea is more important to me than actually funding it, because if you package it well, you present it well, you do your case study in a clear and methodical manner. And this is where I come back again to the mentoring and the education part of it, and what we can play a positive role in that field. If you can do it well, and if the presentation stacks up, I think you will find more funding than you require in a lot of cases. But you need to make everything stack up, so to speak. That may take more than one attempt to get to it. You shouldn't just give up on your first unsuccessful attempt. Another thing we see developing here is generally, I don't know about Egypt and Jordan, but I think in the Gulf, in the past, businesses or startups have always been confined to family members. So you see siblings, then it goes to second generation, third generation, or maybe an individual who started a business, then passed it on to his sons or daughters. What we are seeing now is more partnerships with people, foreigners outside the family, school friends, people who bring the missing part in the jigsaw puzzle. Maybe somebody has the idea, somebody has the finance, somebody has the market access. So they sit down together, form a partnership, which is good. The final thing that we still see missing here is going public. People still tend to hold on and clinch to their businesses. And this is something we're trying to encourage as well, is to have a full cycle, to go from an individual company to a WLL, to a shareholding company, and then to go public. And we have achieved a lot of success in the last 4 years in Bahrain. If you look at the CR components, we were 47% of our, 53% of our CRs were individual companies, which is a company owned by one person. And it's the most risky type because it exposes any indebtedness to your personal assets as well. Right. What we have done through educational programs, through a lot of awareness campaigns, is that we've encouraged people to move into a corporate structure. You can still be a single owner, but under a company, not as an establishment. And today, the number of CRs as individual establishments has shrunk to only 24%. So we more or less halved them in the space of 4 years, which is great because it gives us more governance. They are required to submit financials to the ministry. There's more transparency, and it gives them a corporate structure, which takes them a step closer to the public market. We would like to see more and more listings. I mean, Her Excellency Rania mentioned that a company went listed on NASDAQ. The question is, why do they have to go to the US to seek capital? There's abundance of money in the region. The answer is because people appreciate listing there. There's more of a captive market. It's not the money. There's enough money here in the region, but the culture is not there yet for people to list their companies and for people to buy with multiples. So this is something that's coming. We see it developing in the region, but I think it will take a few years down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing is a lot of the entrepreneurs and startups today are backed by venture capital. So I think you will see, inshallah, a wave of more capital markets transactions. As long as the regulation sort of moves in the right direction, I believe that wave will come. So look forward to that. Your Excellency Al-Falasi, I'll pose the same question to you because you mentioned it as well. And I know you have a specific initiative for Emirati specifically in terms of funding their enterprises. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you're approaching that sort of cultural shift.
Yes, so as I've mentioned before, I think I'm not too worried about the VC ecosystem, broadly speaking. It's maturing quite well. The only thing I feel is that the national Emiratis are missing out. Now, having said that, we've seen a growing interest right now. If I look at the Higher College of Technology, I'm also the chancellor there. We're seeing an increasing number of Emiratis who actually start a business before graduating. And what we have done there as an example is we've created a free zone within the institution where you can actually issue a license. And there are available labs for prototyping and even different sectors, including media and others, where you allow these students to start thinking about a business and incubate within the university prior to graduation. So that has been taken off quite well. I believe the number I have is 152 so far have been incorporated. So that's a big change. We try to make them think about it before they even go and graduate. Now, on the social level, we have different programs. We have Khalifa Fund in Abu Dhabi, Dubai SME in Dubai, Rawad in Sharjah, and others. And these are ones where they're more of a lending rather than an equity. So they would give an interest-free loan to Emirati to start their business. And they have been typically designed for traditional SMEs. So you get a $100,000 loan, $200,000 loan over 4 or 5 years with a grace period. So these have been designed for the traditional SMEs, but not so much when it comes to tech startups, where the last thing you need is to start up your company with a loan. Now on that front as well, we have something called NAFIS. It's a program that the government has initiated, over $20 billion of funding. It's mostly to find economic opportunities for nationals graduating beyond public sector. Now, a big portion of that is employment in private sector. So we're offering training, we're offering, an incentive and for them to go to private sector, but also there's $1 billion set aside for us to create a fund specifically for recent graduates. And that one's a bit challenging to try to think. So how do you go about, entrepreneurship by definition is risky. A big number of entrepreneurs fail. And if you look at the numbers, your likelihood of failure is much higher at a younger age. And couple that with no experience, it becomes even more challenging because when you go from academic setting to directly starting your own business, you have no reference point when it comes to simple things like, basic business admin. How do I hire? How do I get my team together? So that I think will be a big challenge. And unfortunately, the preconceived notion is that the most successful entrepreneurs are college graduates. These are the outliers, right? So now we need to find a way. And what we have to come to in terms of a conclusion is that we cannot afford and provide that funding to graduates with no experience unless you couple it alongside with non-financial support. So as we speak today, we're looking into tools like business venture studios where you can actually incubate them very closely, given that they don't have an experience prior to that. So we have, as I said, on one hand, the traditional SME lending, and then you have the new technology equity side, which requires a lot of non-financial support, given that these entrepreneurs did not start their businesses before, and they have no prior corporate experience. So these are the challenges, but I think, again, if I take a step back, I see also role models, Emiratis, who went through and raised capital, and these are now have created a sense that, look, I can be part of that. Previously, it was, I cannot be a Careem or a Souk.com. These are people who, grew in different countries, geographies, they've been through this before, they know how to do it. I'll stick with my micro business, whether it's a small 1 or 2 shops. But now there is hope for them that they can be part of this journey. It requires hand-holding, but I think we'll eventually get there.
His Excellency Az-Zayani highlighted a really interesting point that I'm personally seeing, and I'm wondering if you're seeing it in the UAE and to what degree you think this could mitigate some of the risk you're mentioning, which is local citizens finding possibly expats who can sort of supplement that team. And actually, it works really interesting. And I think from a venture perspective, we like funding co-founders, right, rather than one founder. Do you see that dynamic happening in the UAE? And how maybe can you support that, where the teams are supplemented from the start with sort of co-founders, one of them being Emirati, one of them being maybe an expat from somewhere else who has the experience?
Well, look, luckily, the demographics work to our advantage, right? And I really believe that diversity goes a long way. Diversity of background, whether it's ethnicity or educational background, I think it really helps strengthen, at the end of the day, the team that runs that company. So what we're approaching right now is to look into grouping them into different cohorts. So for example, we've seen really good entrepreneurs coming from international renowned universities like NYU, for example, where that great mixture. Now, the challenge is as follows. With federal institutions, it's predominantly nationals. So how do we couple them with other experts? And we've run a competition, and it's still running as we go through, It's called Startup Compete, where we have entrepreneurs pitch to us. And what we've noticed is that even though a handful might make it to our bar, but there's some really smart entrepreneurs who their idea might not make it because of regulatory issues or market entry barriers, but we truly believe that that person has the entrepreneurial spirit. So on that front, when we go and fund these companies or offer them, space in our incubators, we ask them to couple with other entrepreneurs. So that's one way we encourage it through incentives by saying, look, here's a group of talented entrepreneurs, whether they're Emiratis or Emiratis, we encourage to work together. We cannot impose, but to try and facilitate.
Absolutely, absolutely. Your Excellency Al Hanaya, I wanted to ask you, Jordan, Bahrain, UAE to a degree share a similar dynamic in that they are small internal markets and they need a wider region, right? They need access to markets. And I think you mentioned that as a really important point that you're working on. And Jordan, I think historically what we see is a lot of great entrepreneurs come out of Jordan, but tend to sort of move and expand to the region, given complexities of continuing to be based in Jordan. How are you tackling that challenge going forward to allow more companies to maintain their sort of footprint in Jordan while expanding regionally? So how are you working to access or to open up access to other markets more freely to allow them to do that from Jordan as a base?
Thank you very much. I just want to go share information related to the previous question first before I answer this question. I have been involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and I got attracted to it back in 2014. And since then, I have been heavily involved and trying to be as close as possible to the ecosystem. Back then, graduates were hesitant to work at a startup. They don't see job security and stability to work within a startup environment. In 2019, early 2020, just before the pandemic, we did a survey in Jordan where 80,000 youth participated in the survey, 45%. The question was, would you like to work in a company or be partner in a newly established startup? 45% said we would love to be partners in a newly established startup. And we have seen the appetite increasing in joining a startup company. Why? Because startup companies in Jordan and the ecosystem in Jordan delivered many success stories and paid back very well to the people working within this environment. And it's a youth, majority youth. We're talking about 90% youth within this ecosystem. So they're enjoying being together, they're enjoying the freedom within this ecosystem. As far as market accessibility, it is one of the main requirements for the Jordanian companies in general, not only the startups. How can they scale up to other markets? I think the Jordanian companies manage to access regional markets. They do have easy access to Egypt, to the UAE, to Saudi, and they're capable, they know their way of accessing these markets and how to reach out to these markets. Sometimes people say, listen, companies are leaving Jordan to other markets because Jordan cannot accommodate these companies. I say, okay, we're proud of them wherever they are. So either they are in Jordan or they are in the US, or they are in UAE, or they are in Bahrain, or they are in Saudi. Okay, we're proud. We don't mind being the launch pad. We don't mind being the initial incubator. And if the scalability of their business requires them to be somewhere else at a certain stage of their company life cycle, let them go there. And at the end of the day, we'll be as proud. But most of the most of the successful companies in Jordan, although they move to other markets, but they keep the back office in Jordan. In the contrary, we host back office for so many regional and global companies in Jordan, either in their business process outsourcing or their IT outsourcing or running their own business process in Jordan or IT office in Jordan. We have more than 20,000 people working in Jordan and actually for companies where their operation is not in Jordan. And you name it, from the big names, the big companies to the small companies and in different sectors. So for us, we know that at a certain point of time, the Jordanian companies need to scale up to other markets, and they need to have access to other markets, and they might need to move big part of their presence to other markets. And most of the initiatives we have been doing as a government, what we need to support them with is to make the bridging between the local ecosystem and the regional and international ecosystems for them to have an easy move in and out and to make their journey in scaling up their businesses to markets where the purchase power is or where the major fund, VC funding is easier, faster, and more structured. So in the contrary, we're going to help them actually to have presence through intermediaries. We're looking forward to hire intermediaries in certain markets, and we ask our entrepreneurs in which markets you are interested in, so we can find a way that links you to that market, that actually helps you to move into that market. Previously, when we were in the private sector, we discussed the idea of actually having launch pads for our startups in potential targeted markets. And let's actually create this for our startups. Again, companies historically, and when we look at the track record of Jordanian successful startups, we did not lose their back offices at all. So most of their back offices are here. Most of the main kitchen is still here. Part of our future vision, I don't want to use the hub that His Excellency Falassi, but we want to be a part of the bigger concept of the hub, which means if we play this part of the cycle, we want to be the center of this part of the cycle. So if the cycle starts at Jordan, ends at UAE, we don't mind. If it starts at UAE, lands in Jordan for part of its life cycle, we don't mind. If it starts in Jordan, lands in the US, again, we don't mind. We'll make sure that we focus on what we are good at. We'll focus on continue supplying this global ecosystem with the new companies and focus on supporting the stakeholders in this ecosystem at the ideation stage. As His Excellency Zayed said, most of them fail at the beginning, before they even start. They have great ideas, but they don't have the right challenge. They're not tackling the right challenge. So they have to pick up the challenge before they pick up the solution. So we need to help them at the ideation stage. So today we're trying to move from the idea of business incubator or business accelerator to a startup studio concept, where we actually give them more or less a joint infrastructure that helps them to move from the ideation to a sustainable business in all its stages. Thank you.
Yes, I think clearly it's not a zero-sum game. So I think it's very important that all the markets realize that, you know, these startups can benefit multiple markets, right? Not just one. Doesn't matter where they start. I'm moving to questions from the audience now, if that's okay. And we've had several questions around something we were going to discuss, which is, you know, there's a big focus on the technology sector. It's very, they're great with marketing. VCs love the technology sector. So that's the one everyone hears about. But the reality is entrepreneurship is a lot more than that. There are sectors outside of that that could be very important for each of you. I'm wondering, as you look at the programs going forward and sectors that you feel are important to you, given your competitive advantage, what are those sectors that you might be looking at outside of technology that you see spurring further entrepreneurship in your country? And maybe we can start with Your Excellency Aziani for Bahrain.
Thank you, Amjad. Recently, we have launched 6 new strategies in Bahrain that are the footprint really for how we plan to develop our economy post-COVID era. Each of the strategies focuses on one sector. That doesn't mean we're closed to anything else, but these are the priorities. Under our ministry, we had 2. One was the tourism strategy, and the other was the industry strategy. There was a logistics strategy, there was a telecoms strategy, and there was a banking and finance strategy, and an ICT strategy as well. These will be the foundation for the reshaping of the economy of Bahrain moving forward. And we chose them because of the unique selling points that Bahrain offers in each of them, whether it's the geography or the logistics, the connectivity, all of that. The underlying factor we have in Bahrain amongst all, and it is really the abundant pool of local talent. We have a very highly educated and well-disciplined workforce here, Bahrainis, and we also complement that with a very open policy of expatriates working in Bahrain. Today, Cabinet announced, we have the weekly Cabinet meeting on Monday. Today, we announced a new residency program where people can be from other nationalities, obviously, can obtain residency in Bahrain and start businesses and operate freely here in Bahrain without having the need for a local sponsor or a company. Citibank is headquartered in Bahrain, their regional headquarters. They just did a worldwide survey to put a data center, and they ended up choosing Bahrain from 7 locations around the world. And they have committed to employing 1,000 coders in Bahrain, Bahrainis. They have started that over 5 years. So the first batch was taken in, 200, 70% of them were girls. And these are all Bahrainis that are graduates from local universities here in Bahrain, most of them. So the talent is there, and the ambition is there. I'll go back and saying the best result is, you know, the proof is in the pudding. We got to make success stories, and we got to put these success stories way out there. Because unfortunately, the young population in the Middle East seems to be, with all the good things happening, they still seem to be demoralized somehow. They always think of the bad things. They always think of the lack of opportunity. A lot of it has to do with overprotection. We have unconsciously, throughout the last decades, became more and more protective of our societies, and we put them in a cocoon. And they have become more apprehensive, I would say, to anybody who's coming from outside to operate in their territory. They see it as a threat, whereas I think it's an opportunity, because it will give them the chance to excel and upgrade their skills. So the idea here is how to create capacity, how to develop the local talent so they become part of these strategies and they become complementary to these strategies. and you make Bahrain a hub for all of these sectors that I talked about.
Well, you mentioned creating examples a few times, so I think we should probably mention that you recently had a huge success with the cryptocurrency exchange Rain, raising $110 million in a funding round by international investors, actually. So, and just to put that into perspective, it represents 10 to 12% of Bahrain's FDI. So it's fairly significant that this one transaction can do that. It's not a surprise to me, but I'd love the audience to hear, Bahrain has always been progressive in terms of its financial sector, and it's been a hub traditionally for financial services. Why do you think Rain's success happened? I mean, fintech obviously was something that you focused on early. What are your plans going forward in that sector specifically? It's an exciting sector. A lot of money's coming into that sector. What are the plans going forward for fintech?
I think fintech is a success story. It's one of the early graduates of the sandbox we created, which we called Fintech Bay. It was done under the supervision of the central bank, where we created a closed system where companies can work out of the regulatory system, build up their skill set, develop their products or service, and then go to the market. I think we're very proud to see the result, Rain coming out as one of the very first graduates, and certainly the largest so far. And to me, that will create a lot of hope. Today, if you go to Fintech Bay in Bahrain, you will see people with startups from all over the world, not just partnering with Bahrainis, but we have partners from one country who have chosen, all of them coming from the same country, but they have chosen Fintech Bay as the place to set up and launch from Asia, from Africa, from the Middle East. And I think that is the success of the ecosystem. For us, we're breaking the shells on this cocoon, and we want Bahrain to be an international player. And the best way to really make the Bahraini a better, or give the Bahraini better chance to compete is not to protect him, but to educate him and to make him a world citizen where he can compete in any country with any other nationality based on merit and skills and qualifications, not based on false protection, because protection is like subsidy. It doesn't last forever, and it doesn't deliver you the result you expect out of it. It's a very, very short-term, short-sighted policy that is not something you can build a future for a growing population like we have in the Middle East.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. I want to turn to Your Excellency Al-Falasi. Same question. UAE has built several sectors very successfully. So outside of technology, what other areas are you focusing on in terms of entrepreneurship? And we have a related question, sidebar to that, given your recent announcement. It comes from Adam from Monitor, which is, you introduced a corporate tax right now, which is still minimal compared to global standards. Do you think that'll affect the plans to diversify into these other sectors?
Mm-hmm. So look, when we talk about the sectors, let me first talk about the sectors that are of interest to the private sector, the ones that naturally VCs would like to invest in. So for all the investment in the UAE, the dominant sector is fintech and e-commerce. What we have seen as well as secondary sectors are agri-tech, as well as F&B. And also the third sector is logistics. So these are sectors that are attractive to VC investors. On the other hand, as government, what we like to focus on are sectors of strategic nature to us. They may not yield the same J-curve that VC investors would want, but we would be equally happy to invest in. And through if I wear my other hat as the vice chairman of MS Development Bank, even though it's a bank lending loans and credit lines, we're now going into equity and saying, look, we are willing as government to invest equity in startups that are strategic to us in nature. So we would leave a bit more value on the table because we see the value in these companies. And we have, specified several sectors, including agri-tech, food security, water security. We're talking about advanced technology. As you know, we have Mohammed bin Zayed AI University, one of the high-end universities in the region. We also want to focus on AI as well. So whatever sectors we feel are relevant to the UAE, we are willing to commit equity, but our approach to this is that we don't want to overstep where private money comes in. So the VC investment that I've mentioned, you were part of that, as I mentioned before, it has been growing organically. And with, as we speak today, I think the last number I have is 42% of VC-backed companies started outside the UAE and moved into the UAE. So you have attraction of entrepreneurs, attraction of foreign VC investment as well. So we don't want to touch that except when we see white space where the supply of funding is less than the demand for it. And that's what we want to operate. So these are the areas that we want to focus on. When it comes to corporate tax, I think purely from my current role, it's a blessing because I keep getting feedback telling me, look, the fees are incredibly high compared to other countries. And my answer to them was, these other geographies have corporate taxation. So the way that government makes money in the UAE in the absence of corporate tax is through upfront fees. Now that might work for multinational companies trying to establish presence. You know, the Cisco's, the CNNs, they'd be happy to pay fees, but not take corporate tax. But now we look at it from an entrepreneur perspective, you're putting a lot of cash up front and it's incredibly expensive to start a company. So with corporate taxation, if anything, it is entrepreneurial friendly. And our intent is to reduce fees going forward. We announced that the corporate tax will come into effect in a year and a half, but the actual collection will happen 2.5 years from now. So during that time frame, you will see fees being reduced in line with corporate taxation. So it will be a much more entrepreneurship-friendly environment. And if I look in hindsight, during the COVID pandemic, it was a healthcare and an economic crisis. The issue we had there was we didn't have taxes that would accommodate for a drop in revenue. So you had fees that you have to pay regardless of your performance. Now, the corporate taxation, the government would have more skin in the game, if you should will, with the success of these companies. So I think it makes the fiscal health of the government much stronger. It works much better for the entrepreneurs and equally important for multinational companies, as you mentioned. It's one of the lowest globally. So we try to, as the system matures and evolves, we want also the taxation system to evolve alongside with it. So again, I think the number one question I had was, will the fees go down? And my answer is yes.
That's good, because that was actually something I had mentioned is when the announcement came out, I was actually very positive on the corporate tax and thought you should have done it a while ago. But it's nice that it's going with the reduction of the fees, because I think both would be very hurtful. But I think you're absolutely right. It now is very aligned, right? The government is very aligned to these businesses making more profits. So the corporate tax is actually a much friendlier regime than fees. So I thought it was an excellent move and should be very helpful to businesses. Your Excellency Elhananda, I want to give you the chance also to talk about Jordan and its strategy as it pertains to sectors outside of technology. Jordan, again, has had success in multiple sectors, but would love to hear your thoughts on what you're doing going forward in other sectors.
Actually, we did study that considered around 300 high potential startups in Jordan to find out which sectors they're focusing on, concentrating on. And we found out that although some sectors are actually taking the lion's share of the number of companies, yet we have seen exponential growth in other sectors. So, for example, e-commerce and education technology were leading in the number of companies operating within these sectors. Yet we have seen tremendous growth in fintech companies in the financial sector. Today, most of the Jordanian banks are trying to go through the transformation journey, and we have 2 banks who announced their digital bank in Jordan. And I know that a few other banks are just on the way to do it. And they're highly dependent on those innovative solutions of the Jordanian companies. On the tourism side, we have seen a good growth in the number of companies getting into this sector specific, either in technology supporting the sector or operating within the sector itself. Agritech, for example, logistics and supply chain, gaming, data and AI. Data and AI, we have a good number of companies, and most of them are actually 2 or 3 years old. And some of them are doing extremely well. Art, media, and design, they're doing it. We're seeing gig economy platforms coming up in Jordan. There's so much attention now from so many in Jordan towards creating gig economy platforms, and that helps them actually to export the talents without exporting the talents. So they export the services of the talents in Jordan, and the talent stays back in Jordan. The thing is, they say, sometimes they say a bad thing leads to good thing. Corona actually changed so many things. And it changed actually the attention to go more towards an open economy rather than a regulated economy. The peer-to-peer economy rather than the traditional economy that we know. So today we are hearing so much about digital assets and digital currency. AI, artificial intelligence, augmented reality. We know Facebook changed their strategy, and they're investing a lot of money into virtual reality. So what's going to happen? All this focus towards virtual reality. So what's next? Health and education is taking major attention these days. So if we look at the people need, the real need of the people, we're talking about health, education, and transportation. That's the main basic requirements. That's where people spend most of their money, and a middle-class person, that's where most of his money goes to. Yes. We see, for example, when we talk about digital currency, we have around 140,000 Jordanians own digital currency, and it's banned in Jordan. So we're talking about 1.3% of the total population. They're trading with digital currency. Credit card holders, okay, 6 years ago were only 2% of the population. Now we're talking about 1.3% trading with digital currency. So when you look at that, what does it tell us? Okay, in certain countries, we are talking about decentralized finance dealing with digital currency with a big value per transaction. But in Jordan, we're talking about a small value per transaction. And it's cryptocurrency adoption, most probably for the purpose of investing. And those are small investors. They don't have any other channels. They cannot go into stock markets, and they cannot buy big value assets. So what they do is they found out digital currency is something that they can invest in. So they can invest as low as $1. Okay. And others, they think they're preserving the value of their money into this currency. So they find that if we take it, buy it, and keep it for a long time, it's going to be back. But the value of transaction is too small. Yeah. This tells us we need to open up that digital space for innovation, okay, and not necessarily an unbacked assets. It can be backed assets, okay. If there can be a digital currency backed by properties, there can be a digital currency backed by bonds, there can be a digital currency backed by real currency. And we went to Central Bank as Ministry of Digital Economy. We said, why don't you issue part of, why don't you cancel 1 GB and below and issue a digital currency instead? You'll help us to accommodate the micro payments within the government payment system. So I think on the financial side, on the digital asset side, it's where we're going for. There will be, it's going to pick up, it's going to boom, it's going to data and the data monetization and big data and artificial intelligence. We're going there. On the IoT side, we see a major movement towards coming up with IoT solutions.
Thank you. I want to go to an important question from the audience that centers around some of our work as well, which is around women participation in the economy. Haifa Al-Kalani from the Arab International Women's Forum is asking, what are you doing to encourage more women to enter entrepreneurship and get involved in the economy? And I'll pose that question first to His Excellency Al-Falasi in terms of the UAE.
Yes, so I think when you look at the UAE, women empowerment is central and pivotal. Women empowerment comes all the way from the top, from ministerial to parliament to board seats as well. So we really take that very seriously, and entrepreneurship is no different. One of the things we're looking at as well from our ministry is, remember when I spoke about the culture side and getting students comfortable and taking entrepreneurship as their choice over employment. Equally important, we want the entrepreneurial culture to be more inclusive. So we're also adding to that, not only the young people, but two important segments, female participation, as well as retirees. So we want to get those people who are currently, whether they're active females or even stay-at-home moms. So we want them to be part of that economy by having targeted programs for them that will be funded separately, and we'll have a specific target marketing campaign. Now, when it comes to the program that I mentioned before, when it comes to graduates, we have 70% of graduates from federal institutions are actually female. So naturally, the majority who will avail of that 1 billion funding for startups for graduates would actually be 70% female graduates. So yes, balance is there, but we're also being conscious of giving opportunities for women who are not in the workforce, nor are they in the education system, but could potentially be at home, where we'll have a specific track for them. That will happen later in the year. We're now focused on, at the moment, solving the social issue of unemployment during the current year.
Thank you. Minister Azziani, I know that Bahrain is also doing a lot of initiatives according to the programs we saw centering around women. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your strategy going forward.
Well, women empowerment is nothing new for Bahrain. I mean, Bahraini women have been active in all facets of society, whether it's in the job market or in the political scene, or, we started formal education of girls in 1928. Women were voting in municipal election in Bahrain in the 1920s. Today, 53% of the government workforce is female, and is nothing new for us to kind of push for. It's generic, it's growing. They enjoy the equal opportunity in education and salary scales and opportunities, and they excel in every field, whether it is in the business world or the education world, medicine. We're very proud of the achievements of Bahraini women, and under the instruction of His Majesty, a higher ladies council has been set up in Bahrain, led by the First Lady of Bahrain, Her Highness Sheikha Sibiche, and that has also enhanced the landscape for female equal opportunity in Bahrain. And we see them today taking many leading positions. A small venture we started as part of the entrepreneurs and SMEs under the SDB board was Export Bahrain, which is an export finance agency. We started it in November 2018, and we purposely designed it only to serve SME sector, because the bigger companies know their way around exporting. They have enough experience and financial support to do so. And since then, we track women in business. 38% of the exports have been by women-owned businesses. We've exceeded $150 million of exports, and these are all SME jobs in that period. And we see more and more women coming into the workforce. We have to appreciate that it is a matter of choice. We shouldn't also put extra pressure on women to work, because they have a huge responsibility also if they choose to take care of their families and homes. And I think they do that much, much better than men do. And it's also something very important, because we want to raise our kids well, and we want to have the next generation ready to take over. So it shouldn't be just a slogan that women push women and force them to get in. We should give them the liberty to I think the first thing is that we should give them the liberty to decide what path they want. And if they want to go into the professional world, they're given all the equal opportunities that males find available today.
Absolutely. Minister Al-Hanand, I'll give you the last word on this. Unfortunately, Bahrain's numbers in terms, not Bahrain's, I mean Jordan's numbers in terms of women economic participation are still challenging. Why do you think that is? And what initiatives are you doing to sort of spur them to get more involved in the economy and maybe even in entrepreneurship?
I'm not sure about the numbers being challenging. In the ICT sector, Jordan women participation, this sector in specific, is around 35%. On the entrepreneurial side, they represent around 42%. On the last statistics that I have seen, women founders of startup companies. And I believe they're doing well in Jordan. And our main problem is, we have an economical concentration in 3 governorates. So the numbers of the women in the other 9 governorates, where they don't have actually the right opportunity just next door, like those in Amman or Zarqa or Erbil. And this is something we're trying to encourage. We're encouraging incubators to go into the governorates. We're encouraging investors, angel investors, and accelerators to go into the governorates. We're opening up incubators within the governorates. We're opening up tech hubs within the governorates. We're conducting and encouraging the startups to create gig economies that involve women in the governorates into the workforce through gig economy platforms without them needing to leave their governorate and move anywhere else. So I believe, I'm a father of 2 daughters and 1 son. So when this topic is being discussed, what I tell my son, we give it 5 years from now, with the progress that I've seen from the quality of the work that women are doing in Jordan. I always tell the son, 5 years from now, we're going to ask the women, how are we going to empower men, okay, to participate more economically. In my opinion, they're the flying rockets, at least in the field that I'm involved in. And I know that there are other sectors where their involvement is very low, but at least in the sector that I'm responsible for, I'm very satisfied and happy with their participation and the number of senior executives or company founders from the female gender.
No, I think that's a great point. And by the way, I think we see that across the region in that in the technology sector, women are well represented. And we hope that that would mean in the future, a lot of these companies as they scale, that we'll see a lot more women participation. We're at the end of our time, unfortunately, but I can't thank you enough for your generosity and your time. If the tracker is any indication, all of you are doing a fantastic job of trying to spur this industry, and really we're hopeful of the future of the region. We hope the tracker is useful to you and to others. If there's anything we can do to improve it, please let us know. This is really something that we hope would spark a lot of discussion, collaboration amongst all of our ecosystems. And with that, thank you for joining us today, and we wish you all the best in all of your programs. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.